Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are glad to have you with us this afternoon, coming to you on Monday at 2 o'clock. And, of course, we will be back on the air again on Saturday at 12 o'clock, and that's WFOV 92.1. And we are very glad to have you with us this afternoon. Hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour, and we'll see how the program goes. We have some things planned that I don't think anyone else is covering, and I think we'll say a few things that hopefully will bring some true education to the scene, and we'll correct some of these scholars and some of the things that they're saying out here based upon their lack of understanding of the data. And some of these people have been teaching this stuff for 30 and 40 years, and they still got it wrong. I said last week that I was going to talk about the impeachment process and try to clear up some of the things that are being said about it by these so-called experts. Let me read something to you by one of these experts, and maybe we'll use that as a jump-off point for the first part of our conversation. This has to do with Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard professor emeritus that's retired now from Harvard University, but I think taught law there for, 30 or 40 years, somewhere around there for his tenure at the top university, supposedly in the United States. And he wrote this book called The Case Against Impeaching Trump. And he is very much on making sure everybody is aware that he has the same opinion about the impeachment of Donald Trump that he had about the impeachment of Bill Clinton. So he wants everybody to know that he doesn't pull any punches. He thought it was wrong to impeach Bill Clinton back in the 90s, and he doesn't think that there's any merit in impeaching Trump in the present time period. This particular part of the article I'm going to read, though, has to do with the alleged impeachment. Some persons alleging they should impeach Rod Rosenstein, who is the Assistant Attorney General of the United States. And so I'll read some of the comments that are made in the article called Dershowitz, Rosenstein impeachment, quote, short-sighted, unquote, and stupid. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, the author of the book, The Case Against Impeaching Donald Trump, Thursday made a case against impeaching Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, calling the moves stupid and short-sighted, and accusing House representatives of giving Democrats, quote, a present they can use against President Donald Trump. In other words, the Republicans are trying to, or at least talking about, impeaching the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, Rod Rosenstein. And Dershowitz is saying this is giving ammunition to those in the Democratic Party that want to use the impeachment process against President Donald Trump. He says, and this is a quote, "It is the most short-sighted and I have to say stupid thing I have heard in a long time. Here we have a present to the Democrats who are trying to impeach Trump, and if they gain the House of Representatives, they will almost certainly do so." And he was talking, he wrote this prior to the House being taking over the majority in the House right now is majority Democrats. The big issue, said Dershowitz, is whether a president or anyone else can be impeached if they are not charged with specific crimes. Quote, just because you disagree with what he has done. Now you have the Republicans, I'm still reading from the article here. Now you have the Republicans making the case for the Democrats who want to impeach the president by offering bills of impeachment and not charging crimes. I'm going to have to write another book, he says, the case against impeaching Rod Rosenstein. The same arguments apply. This is so short-sighted. Both sides do this. They use criminal law to go after their enemies. They use impeachment to go after their enemies. When that happens, the American public is the biggest victim. He goes on to say this finally, and I'll stop at this point when I read this particular part of his statement, because I think it lays the groundwork for interrogating his understanding of the impeachment process, which he doesn't understand. Impeachment, and this is a quote from Alan Dershowitz, impeachment is supposed to be there for serious crimes, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. If you don't like the way Rod Rosenstein is responding to your subpoena, charge him with contempt of court. Bring him to court, but do not use impeachment. That just helps the Democrats who are trying to impeach President Trump. Okay, so I wanted to read Dershowitz's understanding of the impeachment process. And he said that you have to have a crime in order to bring about impeachment. So I'm going to go back to the very first president. We've had two presidents that have been impeached. So I'm going to go back to the very first president that was impeached in the United States, and that was, of course, Andrew Johnson, the successor to President Lincoln, and see what happened in that case. I won't stop at that point. I just want to start off talking about an impeachment where Dershowitz was saying you need to have the person charged with treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors. And I'm going to read the case against Andrew Johnson that did not contain any of that. And then I'll go and look at the Constitution and see what the Constitution says to see if that also contravenes what Alan Dershowitz was talking about. Let me lay the foundation for the impeachment against Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States. Andrew Johnson was, as you know, the president that was installed in office upon the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865. Being from Tennessee, although being a Democrat, and from the state of Tennessee that had seceded from the Union, Andrew Johnson did not succeed from the Union, and therefore he was a Democrat, but one that was loyal to, quote unquote, the Union state, the 22 states that stayed inside the Union. He was one of the persons that did so, although his state was one that succeeded. He did not go along with that secession of his home state. So when Lincoln is killed, Andrew Johnson moves up into the vice president, from the vice presidency up into the presidency, based upon the fact that the president, if he cannot serve at any point in time, then the vice president, if there's a debilitation of the president, the person that stands in his place would be the vice president of the United States. So now Johnson is the president after Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated on the 14th of April of 1865. Now we have Johnson in office. But he does not go along with what has been termed in the history books the radical Republicans. Johnson is pretty much in opposition to what they're trying to do because he feels, being a Southerner, that they are too punitive toward the South, and the terms of their being reinstated as states in the Union was too harsh. So they're going back and forth with this battle between the radical Republicans and Andrew Johnson. It says here in this article about it, it says the final blow between the radical Republicans and the newly installed president of the United States, Andrew Johnson, the final blow came after the passage of the Tenure of Office Act in 1867. This law made it impossible for the president to dismiss important government officials without the permission of the Senate. In a move that infuriated Congressman Johnson defied the law. So let's kind of put that in context. The senators are taking the position that if the Constitution requires them to have a 2/3 approval of the president's nominations for his cabinet, then they're taking the position that if they have to approve the installment of the cabinet members, then they must also then, they're now passing a law called the Tenure of Office Act, and they're saying that if that would be true, if the Constitution requires a validation of the president's nominee to serve in his cabinet, then it stands that, or I should say it stands to reason, their reasoning, that if that would be true, then it also should be true that the president must get their approval to then dismiss a person that has been approved by the Senate. And so therefore, they passed the Tenure of Office Act to prevent Andrew Johnson from dismissing anyone who has been installed by the approval of the Senate. 2/3 of senators have to approve of the nominee. Let me change that. Not a 2/3, because they now they have changed the they had what they call the nuclear option. The nuclear option was a change from 2/3 to a majority standing, because it's not really stated in the Constitution that you have to have a 2/3 vote. You just have to have the Senate approve it. It's the senators that put into place the 2/3 verdict, and now they have rescinded that under the last congressional term. They suspended that, and so now the Republicans are under that particular umbrella of that suspension, a majority vote now. But they had invoked a 2/3 vote at some point. It's not in the Constitution you need 2/3 vote, but it was put in there by the senators. I do agree they can change that, since they're the ones that put it into place in that particular regard. But the problem we're talking about here is whether or not they can, in fact, make the president, impose upon the president, that he cannot remove from office one of his cabinet members without them approving it, since they had put him in there with their validation of the nomination. And so now we have the people in Johnson's case saying that in the Tenure of Office Act that's passed in 1867, they're saying that the president cannot remove a cabinet member without the approval of Congress. And of course, the cabinet member in this case here is Edward Stanton, the Secretary of War, who Johnson wants to get rid of. And because he was one of the only cabinet members that was party to and siding with the radical Reconstructionists, they wanted to protect him from any dismissal. He was the only one in there that, in fact, went along with the radicals in the Johnson administration. So they have now passed this act called the Tenure of Office Act, and that act says the president cannot get rid of anyone in his cabinet without the approval of the Senate, since the Senate had approved them in order to be confirmed. Okay, now Johnson defies the act and he dismisses Edwin Stanton, and that's where the conflict comes in, because they're saying Johnson has violated the Tenure of Office Act. That act says you cannot do that. The president, I'm reading again, the president had long wanted to dismiss the Secretary of War, Edward Stanton, because he was the only member of Johnson's cabinet who supported the radical Republicans On August the 12th, Johnson suspended Stanton in his place. Johnson appointed the popular General Ulysses S. Grant. It made him the Secretary of War. By doing so, Johnson hoped to challenge the constitutionality of the Tenure of Office Act. When Congress reconvened, they overruled Stanton's suspension, and Grant resigned his position because of the conflict between the senators and the president. They didn't want to get caught in between the two. So Ulysses Grant stepped down from the position and rescinded his verdict to go in under the auspices of this controversy. It says further, the event heightened Grant's popularity and depressed Johnson's, or at least as far as the Republicans were concerned. Ignoring Congress, Johnson formally dismissed Stanton on February 21st, 1868. With the support of Republicans, Stanton responded by locking himself in his office and refusing to leave his office. Angered by Johnson's open defiance, the House of Representatives formally impeached Johnson on February the 24th by a vote of 126 to 47. They charged him with violation of the Tenure of Office Act and bringing into disgrace, ridicule, hatred, contempt, and reproach the Congress of the United States. It was then up to the Senate to try Johnson because they impeached him on, and listen to these charges here. The charges are that he brought into disgrace, and this is a quote from one of the 11 articles of impeachment that were filed against Andrew Johnson. He brought into disgrace, ridicule, hatred, contempt, and reproach the Congress of the United States. Now, Dershowitz said that in order to bring about impeachment, you have to have a crime. And of course, the impeachment of Johnson is contending that he has violated the Tenure of Office Act. I'm holding up here, for those that listen to the program on radio, and of course those that would be able to pick it up on YouTube, you'll see I'm holding up the Constitution of the United States. We will all agree that the Constitution of the United States is the premier law of the land, and any law that is in fact in contravention of the Constitution is a law in of itself that's illegal. Therefore, to charge someone with a violation of the law when they are following the Constitution is inappropriate, because the Constitution rules the other laws are in fact made. And since you have in the separation of powers in Articles 1, 2, and 3, departmentalizing the powers in Article 1, that would be the powers appropriated by the Constitution to the legislative branch. And then in Article 2, the appropriation is there given to the executive, meaning the President of the United States. And the third branch, of course, the judicial branch, where you have the court, the federal court, Supreme Court, and so on. That would be delegated to be the authority in terms of their interpretation of the Constitution and of the laws, making sure the laws are consistent with the Constitution. This idea of bringing into disgrace, ridicule, hatred, contempt, and reproach of the Congress of the United States is impeachable if the Congress disagrees with the president, but it is not a crime, and it does not allow the Congress to remove the president from office. I want you to understand that, because Dershowitz claims that in order to impeach, you must impeach because of a crime. And I would dare him to prove that, because that is not true. Dershowitz does not understand the Constitution. And so many of the others do not understand it. Not only in this good regard here, but I'll read another article about the so-called, what they call the birthright citizenship. I'll get into that in a few minutes as well.
I'm going to put it out here right now. If anybody's got connection to former President Barack Obama, and keep in mind he's former president, even though he wants to seem like he still wants to rule. If anybody has a connection to him, and he's supposed to be a constitutional scholar, remember?
Please.
I'd like to have a face-off with you and him.
He would
be. You and he. I think they would be. It'd be comical because
Obama's a dingbat.
Oh yeah, exactly. Just like that. What's that? A new woman just got elected from New York. Got the Ocasio. Cortez. Oh my!
She's a dingbat also.
God. I mean, it's like, okay, they always make fun of Republicans. You know, like when Pat Robertson, for example, ran for president, they made fun of what he said and stuff like that. This woman is just as groan-worthy as anything as any of these right wingers ever put out there. And everybody's like, she is getting attacked though, even by the left now. They are mocking her to some degree.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's like healthy, because it's just like this. If you don't shut this woman up or say, why don't you shut up? You look nice, you look pretty. Just shut up, because every time you open your mouth, you prove we're really stupid for voting for you.
Yeah. She's a gift that keeps on giving to the Republicans, because every time that woman opens up her mouth, she's embarrassing herself, and she doesn't even understand enough. She doesn't know enough to know that what she's talking about is embarrassing. She's embarrassing herself every time she talks. I mean, what about that comment she made that the reason why the unemployment rate is so low under Donald Trump's administration is because everyone has 2 jobs.
Well, that means that if everybody had 2 jobs, the jobs are plentiful. Okay, let's go back and examine what you just uttered, okay?
It's amazing, John, that we have elected people like Ocasio-Cortez, because it shows something about the electorate also.
The nickname she's got is Occasional Cortex. You know, like occasionally brain kicks in. You know, the cortex, cerebral cortex.
Yeah, it is amazing that these people are in office installed by the American people.
Well, Maxine Waters is a perfect example.
That's another example
Nancy Pelosi said some saying stupid. What was it? Well, even actually, I'll go. Michelle Bachmann said stuff. They're all like, I'm looking at these people like. You don't feel guilty for putting these people in office where they have some impact on the rest of our lives? I mean, right wing and left wing. I mean, some of them are total idiots.
Yeah, it's getting very dangerous, because we are seeing the insanity in our governing bodies. Not that it wasn't bad before they got there. I mean, drain the swamp and all of that was what Donald Trump campaigned on in 2016. And I don't think even that's mislabeled. It's not a swamp. It's a crime syndicate.
That's what they should cordon it all off and say, put yellow tape around it, because it is a crime scene. That's what it is. It's a crying shame. It's in a crime scene. Okay, that's what it is. It's a crime scene.
It's a crime scene. And I brought this book. I thought I would probably get a chance to mention this book again, by Thomas DeLorenzo. He has on the front cover, those of you can see it on YouTube and on the program right now, you can see that it has, there are 3 guys on the front cover of DeLorenzo's book, Organized Crime, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. So he has one guy has a revolver in his right hand, and he got a guy in a pump machine gun, submachine gun, and they got another guy holding a machine gun over here on the right side. So it's 3 guys that are well armed. And the book is called Organized Crime. And so unless you read the footnote of the title of the book, in other words, the additional part of the title of the book, you would think when they say organized crime, you're talking about the Cosa Nostra, the mafia. But then it says down at the bottom of the book, it says, after saying organized crime, it says at the bottom of the book, the unvarnished truth about government. And so he's talking about organized crime, but he's not talking about the mafia, or at least not the mafia we normally think of as organized crime. He's talking about the legal organized crime, that mob, organized crime, the unvarnished truth about government. And so we are now getting into how these guys, they keep saying we are a nation of laws. Yes, we are. But we're not a nation that follows the laws. Okay, we're going to take a break with WFOV, and we'll see you back in 4 minutes. Be glad to have you back in 4 minutes. For those that are staying with us here at allpointstv.com, want to continue what we're talking about here. I don't want to get too far off my subject because I want to finish this up in terms of what is happening with these, what these scholars are talking about. And they are just as bad in many ways. They give license in a lot of ways to what these politicians are doing.
See, I had a friend, my own grandparents kind of pointed this out to me when I was a kid. Their impression of most governmental regulations and government employees, basically, they were no different than the mob, because you had to pay for them, get their permission to do certain things. Now, there's some, like zoning ordinance I can understand to some degree. I can understand some safety issues when you're talking about my grandparents had a restaurant. But they were above reproach, and they got solid, passing grades every time they were inspected, because their job, their career is attached to making sure that place had a great reputation. Mm-hmm. But other than that, they said, I have to pay this. He said, somebody summed it up the best way. He said, there is no difference between the government and the mobster. There really is very little difference. They wear suits, they wear ties, they come at you. Basically, you got to give them a portion of the action, even though they have no skin in the game whatsoever. They are, and then they keep on pointing out, like, well, we maintain the roads. Look around Genesee County; they're doing a poor job of that, with a huge amount of money going, God knows where. It's supposed to be intended for that. So that's what my friend says, who are business people. They said, there's very little difference. I mean, it's legal. I mean, but then again, the Nuremberg thing, the laws for Nuremberg, the segregation of Jews, extermination of Jews, all those were made everything legal the Nazis did. Just because it's law doesn't make it right.
Yeah, John, they are every bit as bad as the mafia, the organized crimesters that are not in government. In many ways, they're worse. That's what a lot of persons who have read Charles Ashman's book. Charles Ashman has a book out called The Mafia CIA Link. And the question is, where does the mafia start and where does the government start? The fine line between the two is so indistinct, you can't tell one from the other. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, don't want to shock anybody and scare anybody, but you saw the CIA and the mafia operating in Dealey Plaza together. And you know what happened in Dealey Plaza in 1963, November the 22nd. That was a coup d'etat that we had in this country. And gangsters took the president of the United States out. They rescinded the election of 1960. And you can see them operating in. One day I'm gonna come to the studio to talk, maybe for the whole hour on Watergate, and I want to say a few things about some things here that has not been uncovered yet about what was really going on inside of that building, because some of it has not been told yet about what went on there. But if you have been keeping up with it and been reading about it, and you know some of the things that were going on inside that building and how some of them purposely got caught in that building. Nobody has said that before. I'm saying it. They purposely got caught in that building. And I'm going to talk about Watergate maybe in a very few weeks. We're going to have to finish up some other discussions before we get to that point. But I want to discuss Watergate because that was a coup d'etat also. Let me welcome you back from the break from WFOV. I'm glad you're back. And we're not very far away, as always, from where we were when you left. We try to make sure that we're not going too far down the road. When you come back, we pretty much where we were when you left. But I was talking about, I will discuss the Watergate at some point, because there was also another coup d'etat in this country. People do not, I ask people all the time if they are aware that we had a president in this country and a vice president in this country, neither of whom had been elected by the American people. And this happened in our lifetime. Those of you who were, excuse me, I was doing too much cheering last night at the football game. We were over a friend's house, everybody was cheering for their team. We had a coup d'etat in this country in 1974. And people did not see that during this coup d'etat that we had installed into the presidency and the vice presidency, that we had a president and we had a vice president, and neither of those office holders had been elected by the American people. We did not elect Gerald Ford. We hadn't even elected Gerald Ford as vice president. And we did not elect Nelson Rockefeller, who became vice president once Gerald Ford was moved up to the presidency. We didn't elect Nelson Rockefeller, in the vice presidential chair. Both those office holders in 1974, Gerald Ford and Nelson Rockefeller, were in the presidency and the vice presidency in this country, and neither one of them had been elected by the American people. It was a coup d'etat right in front of the American people, and they never saw it. And they still don't see it. You can claim all you want to about other governments around the world, that they don't have whatever. In this country here, in the United States of America, it does not operate any differently. And I will raise this question also before I get back to what I want to really bring to the table today in our discussion, because I want to deal with impeachment at some length. But I will say this on the QTN running, that you'll notice that there is no deep state in North Korea, and there's no deep state in Russia or in China. But you have a deep state here in the United States. And so the question is raised then is, why do you have a deep state in the United States? And of course the question also is, what is a deep state? You don't have one in North Korea, you don't have one in China, you don't have one in Russia, because their force is naked. They use naked force in North Korea. They use naked force in China. You saw it in Tiananmen Square. When those students were out there at Tiananmen Square, you saw them go in there and did what they did in taking those students out of there. Maybe you saw the extremities of the behavior of the government there. Did you see it May the 4th, 1970 at Kent State University? Go read Mitchell's book, The Kent State Incident, where the same thing happened. Where those students did not think their government would come at them like that. And the reason why they didn't think that the government would do that is because they've been taught a false history of this country. A false history. The government has been coming at its citizens in this country ever since we've been here. And every time they come at the citizens of this country, they came at them for primarily the taxation issues in this country. Started in 1794. And then go and continue to look at it in terms of coming at the country again in much larger numbers in 1861. This was also a tax war. The Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, it wasn't a rebellion. What it was that person did not think the government had the power to tax them in terms of turning their corn, which they could not export out of the Appalachian Mountains. It would be much easier to put it into a liquid form and sell it that way. And when the government tried to tax that, they objected to it. And George Washington and the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, put 13,000 soldiers and made 13,000 soldiers tax collectors and rode into Pennsylvania against those farmers. That's not in the history books in this context, but that's what happened. And another tax war, everybody's talking about the slavery issue involved in this war. You have to go read the documents for yourself. I won't say anything that I don't have documents for. And I don't go along with anyone who tells me something that I cannot, first of all, find out on my own if it's true or not. And by the way, I have to tell you this. When they interviewed Donald Trump yesterday, before the interview on the program yesterday, I went and read the transcript because I don't trust the media, and neither should you. But although I'm not telling you who to trust, who not to trust, I'm just telling you that the media, this media is a part of the deep state. It is no longer the military-industrial complex that was talked about by Eisenhower. It also includes some other figures in it now, and the media is a part of the deep state. But I was raising the question: why is it that you don't have a deep state in these totalitarian governments? It's because they are out from behind the mask and they are out in your face with naked force. So what is the deep state here? The deep state is only the government disguising itself as if there is a difference between the government power being used in this country here and the naked force being used elsewhere, as if they're different here, and they're not different here. The government here is just as tyrannical, but they have to disguise it because there are certain restraints. Let me tell you something, another thing while we're on this point. I listen to how we've been taught to talk in this country about our rights, about these gangsters. Tucker Carlson, for example, last week said that he will continue to stand on his First Amendment rights. You've been taught that. And let me tell Tucker Carlson something, and listen very carefully. There are no First Amendment rights. You've been taught through a very carefully construed, put together propaganda machine to think about what the Constitution does not say. I said once before, there's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. And there is no First Amendment rights in the Constitution. So Carson, who's a very smart person, but he went to school and learned the same nonsense they're teaching there in these indoctrination centers. Go read the Constitution for yourself and see what it really says. Go read the so-called Bill of Rights. There's no Bill of Rights in it, but go read what is called the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And this time, read it with clarity. I want you to read, let me read the First Amendment. And listen carefully to this part here. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Now, those who are saying that there is a First Amendment right my First Amendment rights in the Constitution, the mistake that you're making is that you do not understand what I just read. What I just read is a prohibition against the Congress to violate those rights. I just read it. I'll read it again. But this time you'll be able to hear it. Away from you what you've been taught. Congress should make no law. So what is the First Amendment saying, really? It is saying that the rights are inalienable rights, which is what is said in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, not by the government, which has been supplanting the place of God ever since they wrote that down. They've been seeping into God's country, quote unquote. So now our rights come from government. That's not what the Declaration of Independence said. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just authority from the consent of the governed. So what did I just read in the First Amendment then? Not the first of the Bill of Rights, but continued writing in the Constitution of restraints against the government violating our inalienable rights. There's no First Amendment rights in the Constitution. Those are prohibitions against the government violating the rights we're born with. And if I'm wrong, then show me in the Constitution where it's wrong. Let me read another one. Let's talk about Amendment 2. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed by the government. Another restraint on the government. No soldier, Amendment 3, shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. This is because you can see what the problem is here. They are fearful of government, as they should be, and as we should be. Because if we do not hold them to account and restrain their power, we'll have this. And I'm holding up a book again by Thomas DeLorenzo, Organized Crime, or The Swamp, as Donald Trump called it. And the reason why they are on his case, and every time he opens his mouth, not for the reason that you criticize Cortez, who doesn't know what she's talking about, but every time Donald Trump opens his mouth, they're on his case because they know that this is another critique of who they are in the halls of power, and they know what he represents, an outsider's point of view. And they want him out of there. Yesterday, I was talking about yesterday's the Super Bowl game. Donald Trump was asked a number of questions by this Margaret Brennan in a very unfair interview. She did a much better job with James Brown's interview. But I read the transcript before I saw the interview because I wanted to read what Donald Trump said in writing. And by the way, I'm trying to get this interview that Dan Kildee gave yesterday. He was on Maria Bartiromo's program yesterday and was talking, as he always does, in circles. This man, don't get me started on this man. That meandering nonsense he was talking about. But I want to get the transcript. And when I get the transcript, I'm going to read it to show you how this man, they go on these TV shows like they are voices of reason. And this man is another embarrassment in Congress. But that's what we have now. These are organized gangsters. And Kildee, I'm talking about you. But I want to get the transcript first so I don't misquote anybody. Because I don't want anybody saying, well, he said this, but it didn't say that. I listened to it, but I want it in writing. I already sent for the transcript, and hopefully by next week I'll have it and I will read it on the air. These people are running scams on the American people. None of them are serious. None in the Democratic Party and none in the Republican Party. We have got to understand what time it is here. We don't have a Bill of Rights. We have restraints in the 10 amendments that continue the restraints placed upon government. In the first 7 articles of the Constitution, we restrain government by, in fact, dispersing the powers in the 3 branches of government. That was one way to restrain them going out of control. So in Article 1, we have one branch of government set up. In Article 2, another branch. Third branch in Article 3. They were separating the powers because they were trying to limit the powers that any one branch would have, because they know that the power tends to go out of control in the hands of different individuals, because we're not electing angels to government. So how do you restrain them? So they did it that way in that particular regard. Then they tried to restrain them by putting some powers in the Constitution and delegating in Article 1, Section 8 to the federal government in the enumeration of powers. I'll read that to you as well. In Article 1, Section 8, which has 18 clauses to it, it says the following. And let me find it so I can read it so they won't be saying I'm making this up. Article 1, Section 8. And I'll read it so we can all listen to this part here. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imports, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imports, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. And it goes on, and every time you go to another clause, the 18 clauses here, you then have to go back to the Congress shall have power to. And so then the second clause there says to borrow money, to regulate commerce, another clause, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization, to coin money. And it goes on for 18 clauses in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 through 18, with Clause 18 giving you the necessary and proper clause. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that you have a itemization of the powers given to the Congress. They're enumerated in the Constitution, very limited. And then in the 10th Amendment, it says this. You can see the fear the framers had. In Amendment 10, it said the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it, meaning by the Constitution, to the states, are powers reserved to the states respectively, or to the people respectively. So anything that's not enumerated in the Constitution and specifically given to the federal government, those rights, according to the 10th Amendment, are retained by the states. And if they're retained by the states, that means the states are the ones delegating it. They're dictating it. And that was the understanding of the Constitution up to and including everything until 1865. And it was abrogated and changed and canceled and nullified on the battlefield at gunpoint. You don't realize this, but I will tell you this because I want you to know. You're living on the gun rule now. That was decided in 1865 at the so-called Civil War. We'll talk about that next week, because I want to go and look at the Gettysburg Address, and I want to look at what I said on Facebook before they threw me off, that every part of this war to keep the South from seceding from the Union. That war was fought based upon the invasion of a Northern army into the South. An army invaded the states of this country. Of course, they had seceded from the Union and were a separate country. But look at the invasion that occurred. And we're not just talking about the invasion that may well be in Venezuela. They're now talking about maybe going in there. I'm talking about an army invasion of the United States by an army of this country invading states in this country. And of course, you call it a civil war. And when I said that, by the way, when I said that on Facebook, that every part of the war was fought to force the South to stand down from its position, we should have government of the people, by their consent. And they had not consented to what was going on. They had not consented to the taxation that was going on. And they put an army against the citizens to make them comply. And I'm telling you that at that point, we had rule in this country from 1865 to the present time. We have rule by gunpoint in this country. Shielded, to be sure, disguised, to be sure. But look at Roger Stone and ask yourself, how could that happen? And people keep saying, oh, that's what you expect to happen in a third world country. You see how brainwashed we are? Because we're seeing it happening in our very eyes, and because of the fear of understanding what that means, we will not recognize it, although we see it and we point it out, but we put the onus of it somewhere else. Don't put it here. We say that's what happens in a third world country. Well, if it happens in a third world country and you're in the United States, you don't have to deal with it, do you? So you absent yourself from having to confront it, because the subconscious is that it's happening elsewhere. It's not happening elsewhere. They went and got that man out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning. And they got this other person there, Manafort, and got him in there for lying, they say. And this man is in solitary confinement 23 hours of a day in America, not in Venezuela, not in China, not in Russia, and not in North Korea, in the United States. So let's understand what we're dealing with here and understand how dangerous this situation is. Because De Lorenzo is right. This is organized crime, and he's the one who wrote this book, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. This is the unvarnished truth about government in this book. It's also in this book here by Napolitano, The Constitution in Exile. We're not living in a constitutional republic anymore. This country is being ruled by outlaws. The people in this country are gangsters. And I'm reading some horrible things, some things that are horrifying, where the 59% of the American people are endorsing these gangsters, saying that they are going to practically declare war upon the rich. And people are applauding this in this country. They don't realize that once you empower and engorge the power of these people in government, they're no longer under constitutional restraints that were intended by the framers. Once you let that monstrosity, you unleash that monstrosity, it may well start out with the attack upon the rich. But if you think it stays there, as my mother would say, just keep living, because it starts out there, but eventually what happens is they want more and more and more, and before you know it, everybody is under that particular umbrella of they're attacking the income at these horrendous proportions. The government doesn't have a right to our money, and we might as well get that straight right now. And we've been saying there since we got here. We said that in 1776. We said it again in 1794. We said it in 1824. I'm just mentioning some of the outstanding years. 1824, 1828, the tariff of abomination that was passed by the Congress. We said it then, where the South rose up against the rulers when they passed a tariff on imports, which raised a tax on imports, a tax on the American people. They rose up against it at that point, and they rose up against them in 1861. We've been fighting tax wars ever since we got here. Defined elsewhere, as other than that. Okay, we don't have enough time to finish it up again this week, but I'm going to continue to talk about this because I want you to understand the Constitution, because if we're going to get out of this, we're going to have to understand what the law is and what it requires in order to do what the framers had in mind, to restrain power in this country. And we have the document that allows us to do it, but we have to have an understanding of it, and we cannot have these professors that don't understand it misleading us about what they're saying, because what they're saying is not true based upon the documentation. I will continue this discussion next week because we're not quite finished yet. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.